Okay, so now that we have our project downloaded, we're going to take some time to look at Unity and learn the purpose of each tab, understand how we can interact with the editor, and just prepare ourselves for future lessons. Now we'll start by understanding Unity's editor, which is what we're looking at now. Unity's editor is divided into tabs or windows, which each serve a specific purpose. The ones you can see in front of you are the main ones that you'll need to know, so let's quickly run through each one. The first tab is the Scene tab, which lets us see the game and allows us to move our own camera around to see it from different perspectives. Now you can do that by holding the right mouse button and moving your mouse around like that. And you can also use W, A, S and D keys to move the position of the scene camera whilst holding the right mouse button. And if you wish to zoom in and out, you can do so by using the mouse wheel. You can also move the camera by clicking and holding down on the mouse wheel to move the camera from left to right or up and down. Now next to the Scene tab is the Game tab. Now this is the perspective from which our player will experience the game, making it great for performing quick tests with. We also have the Asset Store tab, which can be used to download new assets from Unity Store straight into your project, but we won't be interacting with it in this course. Now to the left of these tabs we have the Hierarchy tab, which holds a list of all of the different elements that make up our game. Now if we wish to interact with one of these elements and maybe make some changes to it, we simply click on one. Unity will then display details about that element in the Inspector tab on our right, this one here. So the Hierarchy tab on the left holds different parts of our game, and the Inspector tab on the right allows us to adjust and change the things about those elements. Now at the very bottom of our page we have the Project tab. Now this is an important one as it will allow you to navigate your way through your project's assets folder. The assets folder is where all of your game's assets are kept as files, such as art, animation, textures, scripts of code, and most importantly, of course, audio. Now, if I quickly open up my File Explorer and navigate my way to my Unity project, open it up, and then open up the Assets folder, then move back into my Unity project and go to the Assets folder there, you should notice that some of the folders and files look similar. For example, we have a folder called Tanks and two files called Completed Game and Sample Scene, which is these two files here. If I open up the Tanks folder and then go into the File Explorer and do the same, again we can see some similar folders. We've got animators, audio clips, materials. These folders are also in the Project tab. The reason why these are all similar is because the Project tab essentially grants us direct access to all of these folders, making it quick and easy to drag and drop different assets you'd like to add into a particular part of your game in a quick and easy way. Now finally, the last tab we will look at is the Console tab. This is where Unity will display messages to us as we test our game. Those messages can come in many forms, such as warning and errors, and we can even use the console to display our own messages, which can be really helpful for testing game mechanics and understanding how our game works. Now we'll look at exactly how displaying messages is useful to us later on in the course once we start looking more into C# and code. Now the last thing to note about tabs in general is that you can move them around in the editor and position them however you wish. So feel free to take some time now to move some of these tabs by simply clicking and dragging them around until you feel comfortable with them. Personally, I like to keep mine in their default position with the exception of the Scene and the Game tab, which I like to separate like that so I can see them both at the same time. I'm also just going to quickly move some of the sizes of the tabs so they're a little bit bigger, and there we go. That's roughly how I like to have my projects. And if you don't like where you've placed your tabs, you can click on Window at the top, go to Layouts, and then click on Revert Factory Settings to put them back to where they originally were. Okay, next let's talk about game objects quickly. So game objects are simply the things or objects that make up any game and can be found in the Hierarchy tab on the left here. All of those elements I was referring to earlier are game objects, and if we click on one, which I've just done here, Unity will show us where that object is in our game through the Scene tab, as you can see. Now, if you ever wish to create a new game object, you simply click on the plus icon at the top underneath the word hierarchy. And then from here, you can choose different types of game objects, such as 2D ones, 3D ones, lighting-based ones, UI-based ones, or even audio objects, which we'll be looking at later on. For now, let's quickly create what's called an empty object. What's an empty object? Well, simply put, it's an object that doesn't have any components attached to it and can't be seen visually in our game tab. What are components? Well, components are what give functionality to our objects. With components, we can add models or images to our objects so they can be seen in the game. We can add movement to them, we can add light to them, we can tell them how to interact with other objects and do just about anything we like. So with the empty game object selected, let's take a look at the Inspector tab. Now this is where all of the components that an object has attached are shown. Empty objects only have one component, the transform component, which tells Unity where in our game our object is by using a 3D coordinate system, but we can always add more by using the Add Component button. Let's go back over to the Inspector tab, and this time let's create a new object. This time we're going to create a cube, so let's go to 3D Object and select Cube. Now this time you should be able to see a plain white box. It looks like mine has spawned underneath the world. So what I'm going to do is quickly drag it up so we can see it a bit better by just moving these arrows that you can see coming off of the object in the Scene tab. And there we go. And then I'm just going to zoom in. And there we are, so there's our cube. Now if we take a look at the inspector, we can see that this object has a lot more components attached to it. The mesh render, for example, is a component that displays a mesh in the game for our player to see, which is basically a shape of some kind, so in this case our cube. We also have a box collider component attached to our cube, which is used to check to see if the cube is touching anything else in our game and prevent it from passing through other objects. Now we won't be interacting with these two types of components too much, but they're good to be aware of. We're more interested in audio-based components, but we'll be introducing ourselves to those in the third lesson of Module 1. For now, what you need to understand is that in Unity, a game is made up of lots of different game objects. Those objects will have different components attached to them, which allows them to do stuff and interact with each other. In Module 1, we'll also be looking at creating our own scripts of code, which we'll be attaching to objects as components in order to run those scripts and get our objects doing more interesting stuff than just sitting still all day. So now that we understand game objects a bit better, let's delete the two we've just created as we don't really need them anymore. So let's go over to our empty game object, right click it and click delete. And let's do the same for our cube. Right click and click delete. Now before we wrap up, here's something you may wish to check, especially if you're working on a Mac. When you downloaded and installed Unity, you should also have installed a separate program called Visual Studio. Visual Studio is what's known as a script editor, one which we'll be using to write our own scripts and code with later on. Now sometimes when using Unity on a Mac for the first time, Unity might default to using a basic text editor as its script editor instead of Visual Studio. Now to make sure this doesn't happen, you'll want to set your external script editor to Visual Studio. Now it's easy to do. Next to the Apple icon in the top left corner of your screen, click on the word Unity and go to Preferences. Now seeing as I'm on a PC, Preferences for me is actually under the Edit tab, but if you're on Mac, you should find it by clicking on the name Unity. Either way, open up your preferences and you should see a new tab appear like that. Next, make sure you've selected External Tools, and then next to where it says External Script Editor, just open up the drop-down menu and just make sure you've got Visual Studio, whatever version you have available, selected. And from there, you should be good to go. And with that, we're also good to go. The last thing I'd like you to quickly do in order to prepare us for the first module is to go to the Project tab, go to the Main Assets folder, and double-click here, the file that says Sample Scene. If you like, you can save the current scene, it doesn't really matter too much. The main thing is that you'll want to open yourself up to this empty scene we can see here. So like I said, this is obviously an empty scene separate from the scene that contains the bulk of our tanks game. Now don't worry too much about what that means for now. We're just going to use this empty scene just to practice writing scripts with during the next module. Now here's one quick final mini little tip that I'd like to share with you, not necessarily about Unity this time, but actually about the course itself and how you can use these videos to help you work your way through it. These videos actually come with a handy feature. If you find the 3 vertical arrows in the bottom right corner of the video, click on that. You should get the option to open up picture-in-picture mode. And what this will do is open up the video or lesson you're watching in a separate tab, which you can expand and watch whilst you interact with Unity. Because I know some of you might be working through this course with just a single monitor, and sometimes it's a bit awkward jumping from Unity to Chrome or to Firefox or whichever browser you're using whilst trying to follow along with these videos. So hopefully this feature will make it a bit easier for you to see what I'm doing and what you're doing at the same time. So once you're ready and you've got your sample scene open, head on over to our true first lesson of this course, where we're going to be creating our first coding script and look at what we can do with it. So I'll see you there.